Imagine possessing the greatest naval fleet ever assembled in history. You have the finest pilots, the fastest ships, and a plan that seems mathematically infallible. Now, imagine losing everything, absolutely everything, in just 5 minutes. For the Empire of Japan in June 1942, victory wasn't just a possibility, it was a certainty. But what they didn't know was that the enemy's greatest weapon wasn't steel or fire, it was silence and a broken code. This isn't just a story about aircraft carriers sinking into the abyss, it is the anatomy of a massive blunder. It is the account of how overconfidence, human hesitation, and cruel physics transformed absolute power into a decisive defeat that would echo forever. Today, we go beyond the maps to understand how the delicate threads of luck and strategic error collided at a tiny atoll called Midway. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, Japan felt invincible. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, a master strategist, devised an ambitious plan to lure what remained of the American fleet into a final, lethal trap. The objective was Midway, a tiny island serving as a sanctuary for Hawaii. Japan dispatched 4 of its finest carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. They were the elite. But here lies the first strategic blunder. The Japanese plan was unnecessarily complex. It relied on perfect coordination between fleets separated by hundreds of miles, all based on the premise that the Americans would be caught off guard. Japanese pride, the so-called victory disease, blinded the commanders. They believed the United States was demoralized and broken. What they ignored was the fragility of their own communications and the unpredictability of an enemy with its back against the wall. While Japanese officers were planning their premature celebrations, in cramped, humid basements in Pearl Harbor, American mathematicians and linguists were performing a miracle. They had cracked the Japanese naval code JN-25. They knew an attack was coming for a target designated as AF. Through a brilliant ruse, sending a fake message claiming Midway was short on fresh water, the Americans confirmed that AF was indeed Midway. The hunter was about to become the prey. Admiral Nimitz didn't just send his ships to defend, he sent them for an ambush. The element of surprise, the very pillar of the entire Japanese plan, had evaporated before the first shot was even fired. This was the moment the strategic blunder began to unspool. On the morning of June 4th, the sky over the Pacific was stained with clouds and smoke. The Japanese launched their first strike against the island, but the results were inconclusive. Admiral Nagumo, in command of the carrier strike force, then faced the dilemma that would define the fate of the modern world. Should he launch a second strike against the island, or wait to attack the American fleet that his reconnaissance planes, delayed by mechanical failures, had only just spotted? Here we see human failure in its purest form. Nagumo hesitated. He ordered his planes to swap bombs meant for land targets with torpedoes for ships. The decks of the carriers became a scene of industrial chaos. Fuel hoses, high-explosive bombs, and torpedoes were scattered everywhere as mechanics worked frantically under extreme pressure. There was no margin for error, yet the decks were a powder keg waiting for a spark. While the Japanese struggled with their own indecision, American pilots were lost in the vastness of the sky. It seemed for a moment that Japan might escape, but through a stroke of luck and sheer persistence, American dive bombers spotted the wake of a lone Japanese destroyer and followed it. At 10:22 a.m., destiny arrived. The Japanese carriers were at their most vulnerable, decks crowded with fueled and armed aircraft. In just 5 minutes, the Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were transformed into floating infernos. It wasn't just the impact of the American bombs, it was the chain reaction of the fuel and explosives that the Japanese themselves had left exposed on the decks due to their fatal hesitation. The scale of this blunder is difficult to process. In an instant, the backbone of the Imperial Navy was snapped. Though the Hiryu attempted a desperate counterattack, it too would soon join its sisters at the bottom of the ocean. The Battle of Midway teaches us that military might is irrelevant if intelligence fails and command wavers. The delicate cords that held Japanese supremacy in the Pacific were severed by a single error in judgment and an inability to adapt to the unexpected. Japan never recovered. They lost their best pilots and mechanics, men who had taken years to train. Midway was not just a lost battle, it was the moment reality collided with strategic arrogance. It remains the most decisive defeat in naval history. Today, when we look at the deep navy blue waters of the Pacific, Midway serves as a minimalist, brutal reminder. In a world of complex systems and massive war machines, the greatest risk factor remains human judgment. A single moment of doubt can topple an empire.